I slammed the blue binder shut on the picnic table, sending the loose papers scattered across the checkered tablecloth. My cousin Jenny's eyes widened behind her perfectly highlighted bangs as I stepped away from the wedding venue she'd asked me to design for free. "You want me to what?" The wooden trellis leaned precariously behind her, the one I'd specifically warned her needed professional reinforcement before tomorrow's guests arrived. "According to our agreement," I said, tapping my worn leather notebook where I documented every conversation, "I'm responsible for aesthetic elements only." Jenny flicked her hair over her shoulder, the gesture I'd come to associate with demands outside our original scope. When Jenny called me last spring, her voice practically buzzing through the phone like summer cicadas. She'd been engaged for 6 months and couldn't find a venue that matched her vision, which she described in terms that sounded exactly like the Pinterest boards I'd curated for high-end clients. "Alex, you're an artist," she'd said, "and you do such amazing work at those fancy parties. You could design something just for us, right? As a wedding gift." I'd reminded her that my smallest event design package cost $15,000 plus venue fees. "But this is family," she'd replied, the way people do when asking for free professional services. "And it's Willow Creek, not some ballroom in the city. We could use the old pavilion at the lakeside park." I'd made a mistake saying yes before thinking it through. Family pressure mixed with the flattery of being called an artist. The next morning, I pulled out my black leather-bound notebook, the same one I use for all professional agreements, and started documenting. "Clear boundaries," I wrote in my precise script. "Aesthetic design only. No physical labor, no installation, no breakdown. Creative direction only." I added dates, times, and specific elements she wanted. The arbor design, the lighting plan, the flower arrangements. We met at Lakeside Deli on June 15th. She ordered avocado toast with extra everything while I laid out my sketches. "This is beautiful," she said, tracing a finger over the drawing of the arched entryway. "But how will anyone get those lights up so high?" "That requires professional climbers and rigging," I explained. "I'll design it, but they'll need to install it." She nodded absently, her eyes already scanning my sketches for more ideas. "And the tables for the reception, how many can we fit under the pavilion?" I'd made a note of that too. Table count, spacing, capacity. But I hadn't noted who was responsible for moving them. That was my first mistake. 3 months later, when I called to confirm final measurements, she sounded breathless. "The crew called in sick," she said. "Could you possibly help move some things tomorrow, just for a few hours?" My fingers had tightened around my notebook, where the pages lay crisp with our original agreement. The ink had dried on the words "no physical labor," but her voice sounded so hopeful, so strained. I looked at the trellis photos in my notebook, the one I'd specifically designed to require professional reinforcement. Tomorrow was the wedding day. I should have said no then, but family obligations have a way of clouding professional judgment. The next morning, I arrived at the Lakeside Pavilion with my toolbox and notebook in hand, ready to oversee the setup as planned. Jenny greeted me with a bright smile, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the late summer sun. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine rather than preparing for her own wedding. Her white linen dress was immaculate despite the morning humidity that already clung to the air like a damp scarf. "The tables came, but they're still in the trucks," she said, her voice too high and tight. "Could you give the guys a hand getting them up the stairs to the pavilion? They're quite heavy." I followed her gaze to 2 burly movers struggling with an oak table that looked wider than the staircase winding up to the venue. The wood gleamed under the morning light, and I could see the intricate carvings along the legs, details I'd specifically requested for their craftsmanship, but now worried might get damaged in transit. "Those tables weigh nearly 200 pounds each," I said, reaching for my notebook. "They should have proper dollies and a team. This isn't in the agreement." Jenny waved her dismissively, her bracelet jingling. "It's just for a little while. I know you're not used to physical work, but these are your designs, Alex. You'd want them handled properly, right?" I flipped open my leather-bound notebook to the section marked Furniture Logistics. The page showed a neat diagram of the tables with their exact dimensions, weights, and handling instructions. At the bottom, in bold lettering I'd added myself after our first meeting, was written, "No physical labor required of designer, movers included in setup package." "I already hired movers for this," I said, pointing to the note. "They're supposed to handle the heavy lifting." "Oh, they called in sick," Jenny explained, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Something about a family emergency, and we can't delay setup. The caterers are coming at noon." I looked from the massive oak table to the narrow, twisting staircase that led to the lakeside pavilion I'd designed. The scent of pine and fresh water filled the air, mixed with the faint smell of gasoline from the idling delivery trucks. My fingers traced the worn leather of my notebook's cover, where I'd made a small check mark next to furniture setup, complete. Fine, I said. But just this once, and only the tables. The fragile items need professional handlers. The oak table was heavier than I'd expected. Movers, two college-aged guys in polo shirts, struggled as I took one end. My hands slipped on the polished wood, and I felt a strain in my shoulder I hadn't experienced since college gym class. We managed to wedge the table through the narrow doorway and up the first flight of stairs, but the staircase to the pavilion had a sharp turn midway that required tilting the table at an awkward angle. "Just lift with your legs," one of the movers panted, his face already flushed. I adjusted my grip, the rough wood digging into my palms. Up close, I could see the fine grain of the oak, the way the light caught in the carvings I'd so carefully selected. I hadn't realized until that moment how much emotion I'd invested in these pieces, how they represented not just my professional work, but my gift to my cousin. After 3 trips up and down the stairs, sweat trickled down my spine under my t-shirt. My arms felt like jelly, and the taste of salt water filled my mouth. I leaned against the cool stone wall of the pavilion, pulling out my notebook to make a note of the situation. The paper felt damp against my fingers from the humidity. These tables should have been handled with proper equipment. I wrote, adding the date and time in the margin. Movers canceled without notice. "That's the last of them," Jenny announced, appearing suddenly behind me. "You're amazing. I knew you'd come through." I closed my notebook, trying to ignore the discomfort in my shoulders. "The fragile items are still downstairs. We need to handle those with care." "Oh, about that," she said, her voice bright. "The china and crystal, could you just bring those up? It's just boxes, right?" The movers left a note saying fragile items were our responsibility. I stared at her. The boxes were marked fragile, handle with care in large letters, each weighing at least 50 pounds. Inside were hand-painted china plates and crystal glasses that had been professionally packed by a company I'd specifically chosen for their experience with delicate items. "I can't carry those," I said, flipping open my notebook to the vendor agreements. "Elite Pack and Ship was supposed to deliver and unpack these. It's in their contract." Jenny pouted, her perfect makeup undisturbed by the heat. "But they're already gone. Had another wedding to set up, and we're running out of time." "It's just boxes, Alex. How heavy could they be?" I looked from her expectant face to the stack of 8 heavy-looking boxes by the entrance. The scent of pine from the woodwork mixed with the dust kicked up from the moving. My gaze fell on a photo I'd taped to my notebook, a snapshot of the china being carefully wrapped in bubble wrap by 2 professionals at Elite Pack and Ship's warehouse. "It's against my policy," I said, though part of me was already calculating the fastest way to transport the boxes without damage. "And I need to check the setup progress. We're behind schedule." "You can do both, right?" Jenny asked, already steering me toward the boxes. "Just these last few things, and then you can supervise everything else. I'm trusting you, Alex, family." I looked at the boxes. I looked at the staircase. I looked at my notebook where I detailed every single vendor agreement, every responsibility clearly marked. In the margin next to the Elite Pack and Ship entry, I'd written, "Designer supervision only, no physical handling." The first box was heavier than it looked. The corners dug into my palms as I lifted it, and I could feel the distinctive crinkle of bubble wrap inside. I took the stairs slowly, my shoes making hollow sounds on the wooden steps. Halfway up, I had to stop and adjust my grip, the box pressing uncomfortably against my chest. "Just set them on the table in the corner," Jenny called from below, her voice echoing slightly in the stone stairwell. "Don't worry about unpacking yet. I made 3 trips up and down before all the boxes were in the pavilion. My arms ached and my shirt was soaked through with sweat. I leaned against one of the support pillars I designed, breathing heavily. The late morning sun streamed through the arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "See," Jenny said, appearing beside me with a bottle of water. "You're a natural. Now about the flower arrangements. They're supposed to go up at the peak of the pavilion, and the florist just called. Their lift broke down." I took the water, the cold plastic bottle a relief against my hot hands. "The arrangements are heavy, Jenny. They're meant to be installed by professionals with proper rigging." She waved her hand dismissively. "Just for today, we can use the tall ladders from the shed. It's only another hour before everything's ready." I glanced at my notebook where I detailed the floral installation requirements. "The arrangements weigh 70 pounds each, and they need to be lifted 12 feet. That requires safety harnesses and proper rigging." We don't have time for that, Jenny said, already walking toward the boxes of flowers. And I've already paid the florist in full. They're not coming back. I followed her, my heart sinking. The floral boxes were stacked near the pavilion entrance, each containing a massive arrangement of hydrangeas and roses that would cascade down from the ceiling centerpiece I designed. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the pine and dust in the air. Let me at least check the installation plan, I said, pulling out my notebook. There might be a way to do this safely. I found the diagram showing exactly how the arrangements were meant to be installed, with notes about the weight distribution and anchoring points. At the bottom, I'd written the name of the rigging company I'd hired, Summit Technical Services, scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. Summit Technical can't make it, Jenny said, before I could even suggest calling them. They had an emergency out of town. I looked from my notebook to the heavy floral boxes to the high ceiling of the pavilion. The stone walls felt cool against my back, but the air was thick with the scent of flowers and dust. Do you have the harnesses? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jenny shook her head. Just the ladders from the maintenance shed. They are the tallest ones we have. I sighed, the weight of the morning's demands pressing down on me. I can supervise the installation, but I can't lift those. It's not safe and it's not in the agreement. But you already moved the tables and the china, Jenny pointed out. What's the difference? The difference, I wanted to say, was that the tables and china didn't require climbing 12 feet on unsteady ladders while carrying 70 pounds of delicate flowers. The difference was that I wasn't trained for this work, that I didn't have the proper equipment, that I wasn't insured for it. Instead, I just nodded. Fine, but I'll need help lifting, and someone to steady the ladders. By mid-afternoon, I'd managed to supervise the installation of the floral arrangements with the help of 2 teenage cousins who seemed more interested in their phones than in safety. My shoulders ached from reaching up to guide the flowers into place, and my shirt was soaked through with sweat. The scent of roses mixed with the dust in the air, creating a cloying perfume that made my head ache. I made another note in my notebook. Floral installation, supervised only, physical lifting not included in agreement. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Jenny approached me with her hands on her hips. The lighting isn't right, she said. We need more spotlights on the dance floor, and they need to be mounted higher. I glanced at my notebook where I detailed the lighting plan, complete with diagrams showing exactly where each fixture was meant to be installed. The electricians were supposed to handle that this evening. They have the proper equipment and training. Well, they haven't shown up yet, Jenny said, her voice tight. And it's almost 5. We need this done tonight. I looked at the setting sun, casting a golden glow across the lake beyond the pavilion. The temperature had dropped slightly, bringing welcome relief from the day's heat, but a breeze was picking up, carrying the scent of water and pine. The spotlights need to be mounted 20 feet up, I said, flipping to the lighting section of my notebook. That requires scaffolding and safety equipment. Can't you just stand on the tables? Jenny asked, pointing to the oak tables we'd struggled with earlier. I stared at her. Those tables aren't rated to hold that weight, and standing on furniture is against OSHA regulations. She waved her hand dismissively. It's just for tonight. We're not going to have an accident. I looked from her face to my notebook where I had the electrician's contract pinned to the page with a paperclip. In bold letters, it specified that only licensed professionals would handle electrical installation. The electrician is scheduled to arrive at 6, I said. Let's wait for them. Jenny sighed dramatically, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the last rays of sunlight. But what if they're late? We need backup plans, Alex. That's what you always say in your planning sessions. I ran my hand over my tired face, the rough stubble scratching against my palm. My notebook felt heavy in my hands, filled with all the plans and agreements that suddenly seemed meaningless. I'll call them, I said, pulling out my phone. Just to check. The electrician's voice was calm on the other end of the line. Sorry, Alex, he said. Our truck broke down. We won't make it until tomorrow morning. I could hear the sound of his tools in the background, the metallic clinking that had become familiar over the months of planning. Tomorrow morning, I repeated, my voice tight. But the wedding is tomorrow evening. I know, but there's nothing we can do, the electrician said. Our truck needs a new alternator. We're waiting on the part. I glanced at Jenny, who was watching me with an expectant look. Her perfectly made-up face showed no concern for the setback. I understand, I said into the phone. We'll figure something out. When I hung up, Jenny's smile was already spreading across her face. See, it's meant to be, Alex. You designed this place. You know it better than anyone. You can handle the lighting, right? Just for tonight. I looked from her face to the tall ceilings of the pavilion to the spot where the spotlights needed to be installed. The scent of the lake mixed with the dust and flowers, creating a thick air that made it hard to breathe. "I'm not licensed for electrical work," I said, though I knew it was useless to argue. "Just run some cables," Jenny said, already leading me toward the power distribution box I designed to be discreetly hidden in one of the support pillars. "You know where everything goes. It's just temporary." The power box was nestled in a stone pillar I'd specifically designed to conceal it. I knelt down, the rough stone scratching against my knees through my jeans. The smell of dust and electrical insulation filled the air as I unlatched the door. Inside, neatly organized cables snaked in color-coded bundles, the way I'd designed them when I first drew up the electrical plan. "I need to document this," I said, pulling out my notebook. I made a detailed sketch of the setup, noting which cables were for which fixtures. At the bottom, I wrote, "Electrical work performed by designer, temporary installation only, professional electricians scheduled for morning." As I worked, running cables to the spots where the spotlights would be installed, I could feel Jenny's eyes on me. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of lake water and pine, but inside the pavilion the air was thick with dust and anticipation. "Be careful with those cables," Jenny warned, though she didn't move to help. "They need to be secured properly." I nodded, carefully fastening the cables along the beam I'd designed to hold them. The rough wood scraped against my fingers, and I could feel the strain in my shoulders from reaching up. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the floor, and the lamps we'd already installed cast a warm, golden light. "There," I said, stepping back to admire my work. "All the cables are run. Now we just need to mount the spotlights." Jenny's face lit up. "Perfect. Now about the dock. The florist just called. Some of the arrangements we're putting out there aren't sitting right on the railings." I looked from my notebook to the floating dock extending out over the lake, now partially in shadow as the sun disappeared. The wooden dock swayed slightly in the breeze, and I could hear the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. "The dock was professionally designed and installed," I said, flipping to the section about waterfront installations. "The railings are reinforced to hold the weight of the arrangements. We just need to position them properly." "Well, they're not sitting right," Jenny insisted. "And the florist can't come back. They've already left for the day." I sighed, the weight of the day pressing down on me. "I'll take a look, but I'm not going to be able to fix structural issues tonight." The dock was cooler than the pavilion, the lake breeze carrying the scent of water and damp wood. The rough planks felt uneven beneath my feet as I walked toward the railings where the floral arrangements were supposed to be placed. "They're supposed to clip onto these brackets," I said, pointing to the metal hardware I'd specifically designed to hold the arrangements securely. "But it looks like they weren't installed properly." I took a closer look, my fingers tracing the edge of the railing. The metal felt cold against my skin, and I could feel the vibration of the water beneath the dock. My fingers closed around the leather-bound sketchbook in my pocket, its familiar edges pressing against my thigh through the fabric of my slacks. That book wasn't just for designs and color palettes, it was a record of everything. Every email, text, and conversation with Jenny about the wedding venue, documented with dates and times. I remembered our initial meeting at Lakeside Cafe, her highlighting that as a gift part of the agreement with a pink marker pen. But she'd also circled the clause where I specified I wouldn't be performing any structural or installation work requiring specialized labor, especially not within the last 48 hours before the event. The breeze off Willow Lake carried the scent of pine and damp earth, mixing with the faint smell of fresh paint from the newly completed pavilion. I could hear the distant laughter of the catering crew setting up across the grass, their voices echoing slightly in the late afternoon air. The dock creaked beneath our feet, a sound that had seemed charming hours ago, but now seemed like a warning. Jenny tapped her perfectly manicured nails against the metal railing, the sharp sound cutting through the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. "Come on, Alex," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's just one bracket. We both know you can handle it." I opened my sketchbook to the most recent entry, not the one with the bracket sketch, but the page where I documented our initial agreement, dated June 15th. There it was in black and white, Alex Morgan as a gift to design all aspects of wedding venue. Exclusions, all structural work, electrical installations, and specialized labor to be completed by contracted professionals. My penmanship was precise, each letter carefully written in my blue ink, the same ink I'd used for every entry in this book. The sun shifted position, casting a different angle of light across the water. I could see my reflection momentarily in the dark lake's surface, a distorted image of me holding the evidence that could change everything. The paper felt rough beneath my thumb, the lines of text swimming in and out of focus as I considered the implications. I smoothed the corner of the page in my sketchbook, feeling the slight resistance of the thick paper against my thumb. The crystal chandelier I'd designed hung motionless above the dining tables, catching the late afternoon light and scattering rainbows across the empty chairs. I flipped back to my documentation page, not the one about the chandelier specifications, but the original agreement. The ink looked darker than I remembered, each word standing out with unnerving clarity. "I just need you to secure this while I climb up," Jenny said, gesturing to the heavy crystal pendant she wanted me to attach to the ceiling beam. The gallery space smelled of fresh paint and dust from yesterday's setup. Her perfectly highlighted hair caught the light as she pointed upward, toward the high ceiling where the crystal centerpiece needed installation. The chandelier component was heavy in my hand, cool despite the afternoon sun. I weighed its importance against the potential consequences if it fell during the ceremony. My fingers traced the outline in my sketchbook where I documented every conversation with Jenny since January. The entries formed a pattern, her changing requirements, my adjustments, and the boundaries I'd carefully established. "I'll call someone who's actually qualified for this," I said finally. The words felt solid in my mouth, like they'd been there all along, waiting for the right moment. Jenny's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Who?" "The electricians I hired are all busy with the main venue setup. You designed this, Alex. You know what it needs." The scent of lemon polish and fresh flowers filled the air as I stepped back from the ceiling display. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the contact for Morgan Reynolds, the wedding planner I'd hired to coordinate everything. His voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Alex, everything okay? The bride's a bit stressed. She's asking me to climb this 30-foot ladder to attach a crystal pendant directly to the ceiling beam," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm not a certified electrician, and these pieces are worth more than my car." "I'm aware of the fixture," Morgan said. "Why is she asking you to handle it?" I heard papers rustling on his end. "There's something you should see," I said, flipping through my sketchbook to the specific section documenting our agreements with dates, times, and signed initials where possible. The pages had a certain smell, the combination of leather binding, paper, and my blue ink pen that had become familiar over the months of planning. "Have you been documenting everything?" Morgan asked, surprise in his voice. "It's how I operate," I replied, reaching the page with June 15th written at the top in my precise script. "Initial agreement, venue design as gift. Exclusions, all electrical installations, specialized labor to be completed by contracted professionals." The air conditioning hummed above us, creating a steady white noise that suddenly seemed very loud. Across the room, a gust of wind made the ballroom doors rattle for a moment. I watched them, then returned my attention to the call. "I've documented every deviation from that agreement," I continued, flipping to the most recent entry where Jenny had insisted the chandelier be installed immediately. Specific notes about conversations, including her insistence that I handle this electrical element yesterday, despite my qualifications. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Then I heard him flipping through what sounded like papers on his end. "I have the vendor agreements here. The electrical work was contracted to Bright Spark Electric. They confirmed in writing last week that all installations would be complete by today." My finger traced the outline of a doodle I'd made during a particularly long meeting about table arrangements. The doodle showed a perfectly balanced centerpiece, something I excelled at designing, but not installing. "Jenny doesn't seem to have received that confirmation," I said. "She's insisting I handle this pendant installation myself." "Where is she right now?" Morgan asked. "About 20 feet below me on the ladder," I said, glancing down at Jenny, who was looking up expectantly. "She thinks I'm just getting tools." "Take pictures," Morgan said suddenly, "and document her current request. This needs to be in writing." I pulled my phone away from my ear and opened the camera app. The chandelier loomed above me, the crystal pendant still in my hand. I snapped a quick photo of the fixture, then one of the documentation page in my sketchbook. Jenny called up, her voice echoing slightly. "Everything okay up there?" "Just getting a better angle," I called back, switching back to the phone call. "Got it. Email those to me right now," Morgan instructed. "And keep a detailed log of this conversation. Date, time, what was said." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. The crystal of the pendant felt smooth against my palm as I adjusted my grip. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to increase in intensity. I typed out a quick email with the attached photos and sent it. Done, I confirmed. Good, Morgan said. I'm pulling in Sarah from Elite Event Safety. She's our electrical compliance specialist. She'll be there in 30 minutes. Sarah. I remembered her from initial planning meetings. Her clipboard had been thicker than most people's novels, and her questions had been precise, sometimes uncomfortably so. Is there a protocol for this situation? I asked, adjusting my grip on the crystal. Absolutely, Morgan said. When a contracted element poses safety concerns or violates vendor agreements, we implement a halt work procedure until it's resolved. Halt work, I repeated. The word sounded official, final. I made a note in my sketchbook, adding it to the pile of documentation that had grown over months of careful record-keeping. Alex, one more thing, Morgan said, his tone serious. Under no circumstances should you attempt that installation yourself. Is that understood? I looked down at Jenny, who was now checking her phone, presumably waiting for me to finish my call. The light glinted off her perfectly manicured nails as she typed a message. Understood, I confirmed. I'll wait for Sarah. As we ended the call, I tucked my phone back into my pocket and carefully placed the crystal pendant on a nearby table. The polished wood surface felt smooth beneath the crystal. I flipped to a fresh page in my sketchbook and began documenting the conversation with Morgan, adding details like the exact time, 4:32 p.m., his exact words, and my observations about Jenny's activities below. The hum of the air conditioning continued, mixing with the scent of lemon polish and cut flowers that filled the ballroom. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the venue entrance. Sarah from Elite Event Safety emerged, carrying a large portfolio case and wearing a practical navy pantsuit. Her expression was neutral, professional as she scanned the area. You must be Alex, she said, extending a hand. Sarah Chen, electrical compliance. We shook hands, hers was firm, confident. I've been reviewing the documentation you sent, she said, nodding toward my sketchbook where I was still writing. Impressive record-keeping. Alex Morgan, I said. Wedding designer. She gestured toward the chandelier display. Let's take a look at these fixtures. We walked toward the installation, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. As we approached, Jenny appeared from around the side, her smile bright but strained. Alex, there you are. I was about to send a search party. Her eyes flickered to Sarah. Who's this? Electrical specialist, I said simply. She's evaluating the fixtures. Jenny's eyebrows arched slightly. Everything's perfectly safe. We've had professionals all week. Sarah opened her portfolio case, revealing clipboards, testing equipment, and a tablet computer. I'll need to do a formal inspection, she said, already pulling on safety goggles from a side pocket. Of course, Jenny said, her smile tightening. Just don't take too long. The ceremony setup starts at dawn tomorrow. Procedure requires time, Sarah said, already walking toward the ladder. Certain elements need to be tested for proper grounding and load distribution. I watched them walk away, Jenny explaining the fixture specifications while Sarah took notes. The scent of lemon polish mixed with the smell of dust and something electrical from Sarah's equipment. I made another entry in my sketchbook, documenting the arrival time and initial observations. Sarah climbed the ladder with practiced ease, testing the connections, occasionally taking readings with a small device, her other hand firmly on the rail. Jenny stood below, occasionally looking at her watch, her heels sinking slightly into the carpet that was still slightly damp from cleaning. After 20 minutes, Sarah descended, her expression unreadable. She removed her safety goggles and tucked them into her portfolio case. There are several code violations here, she said, her voice calm but firm. Most significantly, the main electrical feed shows improper grounding that wasn't in the original installation plans. Jenny's smile disappeared. Improper grounding? That's impossible. We just had it inspected last week. The inspection you have on file was done visually from ground level, Sarah countered, consulting her tablet. A proper electrical assessment requires testing of the connection points and load-bearing elements. These, she tapped the screen, show inconsistent amperage that could cause the fixtures to fail during the ceremony. I made note of this in my sketchbook, adding a small diagram based on what Sarah was showing on her tablet. The paper felt smooth beneath my pen, the ink flowing evenly. Who was supposed to do this inspection? Jenny asked, her voice rising slightly. Bright Spark Electric was contracted for both the installation and inspection, Sarah replied. According to my records, they failed to perform adequate load testing as required by County Ordinance 214B, subsection 5. Jenny looked flustered, her hand flying to her highlighted hair. That's not possible. We have their certificate of compliance. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The certificate they provided is from last month, before these additional fixtures were installed. Current regulations require reassessment after any major modifications. I watched the exchange, my pen moving steadily across the page. The scent of lemon polish was stronger now, mixed with the metallic tang of ozone from the electrical equipment and something floral from the nearby centerpieces. So what does this mean? Jenny demanded. The wedding is tomorrow. Sarah closed her tablet and snapped her portfolio case shut. The electrical system cannot be activated in its current condition. Work must be halted until proper rewiring can be done and inspections completed. Halted? Jenny's voice was sharp now, cutting through the quiet ballroom. That's impossible. Everything's scheduled. The guests are arriving tomorrow. Those are the safety protocols, Sarah said, not unkindly but without yielding. I'll need to file a stop work order with the venue management. I made another note in my sketchbook, adding the time of this exchange. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the polished dance floor. A bell chimed somewhere in the distance, echoing through the empty space. You can't do that, Jenny said, stepping closer to Sarah. You have no authority here. Actually, I do, Sarah replied calmly. As a licensed electrical compliance specialist certified by Greenfield County, I have the authority to halt any venue operations that pose an electrical safety risk. Jenny's eyes darted toward me, then back to Sarah. This is Alex's fault. She designed this. Sarah glanced at me, then back to Jenny. The designer is not responsible for electrical installation safety. Those responsibilities were clearly contracted to Bright Spark Electric. I flipped back to my documentation, showing Sarah the original agreement where I'd specified that all electrical work would be handled by professionals. She nodded, making a note on her tablet. The documentation is clear, she confirmed. Alex was not to perform any electrical work. Jenny looked from Sarah to me, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. But you're here. You can fix it. Just do something. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to increase in intensity, creating a steady background noise that somehow made the silence more noticeable. I could smell the lemon polish more strongly now, mixed with the scent of cut flowers from where the florists had been working earlier. That's not how safety protocols work, Sarah said firmly. This requires professional assessment and repair by licensed electricians. She pulled a form from her portfolio case and began filling it out. I'll need to contact venue management immediately. The alarm blared at 4:30 a.m. I showered quickly, pulled on my professional dress pants and blazer, and packed my leather-bound sketchbook with my detailed floor plans. When I arrived at Willow Creek Venue at 6 a.m. sharp, Jenny was already there, pacing in her pajamas and robe. Thank God you're here, she said, her voice trembling. We need to rearrange all the heavy furniture immediately and then hang those chandeliers in the main hall. I tried to do it myself last night, and now my back is killing me. I opened my sketchbook to the page where I documented our original agreement. Jenny, I came to supervise the setup team, not to move furniture or hang chandeliers myself. That was the understanding when I agreed to design this as your wedding gift. But who else knows how to get it right? After all the free work you've done, she said, gesturing toward the delicate crystal chandeliers that needed to be suspended from the 20-foot ceilings. My fingers traced the notes I'd taken during our planning sessions. I'd always believed that documenting agreements was crucial in event design, especially when working as a favor. I hired Cedar Ridge Construction specifically for this. Their team can handle it. An hour later, 2 burly men arrived and began efficiently moving furniture while I directed them according to my floor plan. The scent of pine from the newly arranged furniture mixed with the aroma of coffee from the catering staff setting up nearby. I noticed how the morning light through the tall windows caught the dust motes dancing in the air. When it was time to install the chandeliers, the team brought in lifts and scaffolding. Jenny hovered nearby, her eyes wide with anxiety as the workers carefully positioned each fixture. Do you think they'll be secure? She whispered, her fingers clutching the sleeve of my blazer. I checked the installation points against my detailed specifications. They'll be fine, Jenny. That's why we used reinforced mounting points. The wedding went on as planned. Cedar Ridge Construction had their team there at 6 a.m. the next morning, working efficiently to secure the structural issues that Jenny had ignored. I stood by with my leather-bound sketchbook open to the page, where I documented every conversation with Jenny about what her responsibilities would be. When the structural engineer gave the final approval at 11 a.m., I walked over to the venue management to add my signature to the certification log. My hands were steady as I signed my name on the line next to the date and time, August 19, 2:37 p.m. Jenny avoided me all morning. I could feel her eyes on me as I made final adjustments to the floral arrangements, checking the placement of each centerpiece against my detailed floor plan. The scent of peonies and roses filled the air, mixing with the smell of the lake water that was now visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly certified venue. I noticed how the morning sun caught the dew on the roses, making each petal glisten with iridescent drops. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the guests began to arrive. The string quartet started playing Mozart as the first guests took their seats. I watched from the back of the venue, making notes in my sketchbook about what worked and what could be improved for future events. The documentation of this process would be invaluable for my portfolio, I reminded myself. I noted how the lighting hit the water feature just right, creating patterns on the ceiling that added depth to the space. When it was time for the ceremony, I found a seat near the back. Jenny was walking down the aisle toward her now husband, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the light from the chandeliers above that I had carefully specified. She didn't look in my direction, but I noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she reached the altar. The vows were exchanged, the rings were placed, and when it was time for the kiss, I noticed how Jenny's eyes darted toward the back of the room where I was sitting. A brief flicker of acknowledgement, perhaps regret, but it was gone as quickly as it came. The texture of her lace gown shimmered in the changing light as they moved through their ritual. The reception began as the sun started to set over Willow Creek. The string quartet had been replaced by a jazz trio. I watched as Jenny and her husband danced their first dance, her movements stiff, her smile practiced. She looked beautiful in her lace gown, but something was missing. When the toasts began, I quietly slipped out of the venue and walked toward the lake. The cool evening air felt good on my face as I sat on the bench where Jenny and I had first discussed the wedding plans months ago. I opened my sketchbook to the very first page, where I had documented our initial meeting. The words I had written that day seemed so innocent now. Venue design and coordination as a wedding gift to my cousin Jennifer. I traced my finger over the sentence, remembering how proud I had been to create this special day for her. I turned the page to the section where I had documented every conversation with Jenny, every request that went beyond the original agreement, the handwritten notes of her asking me to help just for an hour with the structural beams at the Lakeside Manor venue. My refusal, in writing on March 12th, clearly stating that such work was outside my professional scope and insurance coverage. Her angry text message that followed. "Your family! You should help out." I had saved them all, even the ones where she threatened to ruin your little business if I didn't cooperate. After everything had settled, I pulled out the dedicated notebook from Elite Pack and Ship where I kept all my business documentation. I carefully documented the entire incident, timestamping each conversation, quoting her demands verbatim, and noting my professional boundaries. On the last page, I wrote, "Never mix family business with family. Ever." The ink bled slightly where my thumb had pressed too hard against the paper. The notebook sat on my desk now, a leather-bound shield against future boundary violations.